Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of the Paulcast. It's a musical edition. To me, music is life. I believe that wholeheartedly. It's language mixed with emotion or purposeful lack thereof. Spiritual or scholastic, it's a practice that many share and enjoy. It can be comforting, painful, beautiful, repulsive, or whatever, depending on the ears it's hitting and the senses it's affecting. Nikolas Schreck casts spells on the senses with deliberate trips sonically into uncomfortable, beautiful, and spiritual subconscious. I'm excited and absolutely humbled to have him here to talk music, as well as premiere his brand new video for Retrograde as Mercury. Welcome, author, actor, and most importantly for our purpose, musician, Nikolas Schreck.
Hello there. Sir. Hi, Paul. How are you today?
Good, and you?
Thank you. I am humbled to be privileged to be invited on your show. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Absolutely. I've been wanting to talk music with you for a very long time, and we've been holding off on account of this interview. So I'm excited to get going and learn a little bit more about it.
Fire away. Let's do it.
All right. So nature versus nurture is very interesting to me when it comes to music and what you're surrounded with as a child and how it affects you as a musician growing up. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering what sort of music your parents were into and how much it was around you as a child.
Immensely so. First of all, my father was a fairly good singer, was an amateur singer in the 1930s. He was even on Major Bow's radio show and sang. So he was a good singer, and he was a musician, and he taught me to play guitar when I was very young. The first song that I played, which I'm going to do a cover version of, and I have performed live in 2016, was, and I think to directly answer your question, this had a huge influence. He went through a folk music bohemian phase very briefly, and he taught me to play Tom Dooley. And so that's obviously a song about death and a hanging and execution. And I think that absolutely set my mind to writing death ballads, and the morbidity of my music, certainly, even though I was already drawn to that. That was literally the first song I learned to play and to sing. He taught me that when I was, a very, very young child. Also, my parents were surrounded by musicians, mostly jazz musicians, but also pop musicians. So, for instance, the first time I picked up a microphone, they were promoting a show of Herman's Hermits during the British invasion. I was a tiny little kid, and Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits invited me on stage during the sound check, and that's it, who taught me to hold a microphone.
Wow.
The first time I played a piano or even touched one, really, I was practically an infant. I went to a concert of Count Basie's, who they also knew, in Las Vegas, and he was playing for Sinatra. His band was playing for Sinatra, and again, during the sound check, he put me on his lap, and Basie showed me a chord or two. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I mean, I grew up on stages and with a total familiarity of show business. So I think an advantage I had absolutely no idea of it being glamorous or wonderful. I saw it as another profession, and I saw all the problems that musicians had,
Right. And being that you saw all that sort of stuff, what do you know what point it hit you that well, apart from all this craziness that goes on around this is what I want to do. This is what I'm feeling.
Even before that, music is everything to me. It is definitely, it's by far the most important art form to me, and it's more than that. It's my life itself. So as soon as I am, it's almost an insanity to the degree that I've always been sensitive to music.
Yeah.
And I can tell you when I first started thinking about it, even, was my parents had this huge 1950s era entertainment complex, like an old Magnavox stereo that looked like a tank. And it had, they had all their records in it, mostly classical and movie soundtracks, which I listened to on vinyl. But
Right.
on the radio would get two stations at once, and I think it says a lot about my music. I would, I would try to get the radio tuned so that like classical music would be mixed in with some other music and make it like exactly in a perfect balance so that you
Right.
had two. And I think my music is like that in that I incorporate many different elements that don't necessarily belong together. And I think like one of the formulas, if there is one, or at least a pattern in my music, is
Hmm.
bringing avant-garde elements and pop elements together in a way that don't really fit exactly. And
That's so
I think
interesting. Yeah,
Yes, and
they
I think that comes from that. So I listened to a lot of classical music as a child, um, 19th century romantic classical music, and then growing up in the 60s, of course. Now I hated the Beatles, and that was a very definite beginning of my feeling of being contrary and against
right.
the grain of what I mean. I detested them just on first sight. They made me cringe. I can't tell you why. And
Just
so I
wasn't your
always,
scene.
they just seemed so cloying and self affected, and Paul McCartney, particularly, so charmed with himself. It just rubbed me the wrong way. And so I looked
Right.
for the darker, rougher, deeper edge of pop music. And then, so the psychedelic era had a big effect on me. You know, like
Right.
after 66, 67, 68, the whole psychedelic period, which was very keyboard dominated. And
Hmm.
that's an important part of my music too. As we've
Right.
discussed before, the guitar has almost no place until my most recent album. I've never ever used a guitar in any of my music, and I think it's a very overrated instrument, and it's not one that I'm, you know, very I yes, I say to the man who has guitars hanging all over him. But you do have a real instrument there. You do have a keyboard too.
You as
So
well. We
yeah.
had
So
to.
yeah, so psychedelic music affected me a lot. But I'd say if you're like asking for influences, I'd say movie soundtrack music was probably what most captivated me in my youth.
That makes
So,
a lot of sense alongside the you saying about the two radio stations coming together, because something I was going to talk to you about, and it just doesn't matter. We can jump around a little bit. Is that your music is very like one song to the next is a completely different experience,
right,
and it's
that's very important to me. Yeah,
right, and it's like it's kind of like listening to I think rock opera is the wrong thing, but some sort of stage play, but you're just listening to it, and it has something to do, all of it has something to do with each other, but at the same time is disconnected enough that you can listen to everything on its own and it all
right.
makes sense.
I think, and another thing. So then, if that was my childhood influences, you're definitely right there too. My basic training and the only thing I took seriously in school, which I mostly dropped out very early and mostly ignored it, was theater. So I did a
Hmm.
lot of musical theater, and you know, and often played villainous or the darker roles in musical theater, and that you
Right.
know, so I think you're totally right. A lot of my songs thus far are character studies, and that's you know, another thing people don't get about about music. They assume if you write a song, it's for you're Joni Mitchell writing a confessional diary entry, and I don't. I mean, I occasionally write songs that are personal expressions, but David Thomas of Pere Ubu, which is one of my favorite bands, always said that self-expression is evil, and
Right.
I do think it's like very masturbatory. A lot of music is just somebody's day, you know, their personal emotions about something, and I tend to write, like you say, mini. Well, you could say rock opera is as
Hmm.
pretentious as that is. I mean, every song is a narrative. It's a
Right.
character. It's I mean the songs from Radio Werewolf that offended people and still do so much. It's not like I Nikolas Schreck am singing these words. It is me being somebody. But rock
Yeah.
audiences don't have a lot of irony or sarcasm or awareness of even character or distance. So I think you're totally right. There's a theatrical element, even though what I'm saying is real and I mean
Right.
it. It's
Yeah.
it's through a character, and then
Absolutely.
only recently have would I say I've moved somewhat away from that, but not entirely. And I think
Right.
some of my more recent songs are more abstract. I don't know
Mhm.
why. It's just the development that one goes through, and they're more just directly emotionally expressing some abstract emotion, and they're not necessarily a narrative or a character. But that's a very recent development.
Right. And I mean that's another thing that I enjoy about your music is you haven't put any limitations on yourself in any which way. You can play whatever you want and you can sing about whatever you want, which is fantastic. That's the type of freedom that people
Because
want.
my songwriting is not like I can't stand bands and musicians that always put out the same formula over and over. I know that's what people want, and I
Hmm.
know they prefer if I just stick to whatever they first heard that they liked. But
Right.
I'm literally not capable of doing it. And then I think a kind of rule of thumb of my songwriting is that the song sounds like what the theme of the song is.
Right.
So, if it's a cowboy song, it's not going to be heavy metal. If it's
Yeah.
gonna it'll then I mean if I ever do a country and western song, which I could, it would be
Yeah.
because that would be appropriate to the theme. So the
Right.
theme dictates the sound. I mean, like, and I'm very much like almost obsessively looking for some authentic element to include, like in the Radio Werewolf song Charlie's Girl. I recently put that out on my Instagram page about how Al Cooper, the keyboard player for Bob Dylan and the Stones and many others, Mike Bloomfield, legendary keyboard player of the
Yeah.
60s, he happened to be in the studio when we were recording Charlie's Girl. And so he volunteered to play this fantastic organ solo that
Wow.
sounds right out of the 60s because it is. I mean, he is the epitome of that sound. And so I often use musicians that have something to do with the theme or
Interesting.
use an instrument or some sound or sample something that particular and that too gets into the magical aspect of it in that each song is not only a theatrical mini film or mini theatrical production or opera, but also a ritual designed to make something happen within me and to the listener.
Right. And that's when listening to your music, it's not a passive listen. You don't put it in the background and just go about your day. It's one of those things where if you pay enough attention, because there's the surface stuff, there's the humor, there's the different influences of eras, etc., that you've got going on, but there's also um, there's a lot of deeper things. You play with the senses a little bit, whether it's intentional or not. Like there's different things that you'll hear that will spark sight and stuff like that, like or memories of certain things.
Right,
And I
right.
and I think that's a really interesting aspect to your music. And I've
I
got
think
questions about that too.
sure. Well, yeah, go ahead. I was just going to add that the visual part, I have a kind of subtle form of synesthesia, not an extreme form. But in
Right.
other words, when I play a note or sing a note, I get a color or an image, and
Yeah.
I mean, music to me is connected to visuals as well. So very
Right.
often, and this is the mysterious thing about music for me anyway, is a
Yeah.
melody and a lyric will come to me. I could be walking down the street or anywhere, and it will come to me fully formed as if transmitted from somewhere.
Right.
It's not I find it's difficult to even say that I wrote it. It came to me, and then I transcribe it, and I feel like I'm getting messages that I'm trying to bring to earth and record in this very already metaphysical thing of taking sounds which don't even exist and can hardly, and capturing them. but
Yeah,
they come from somewhere else, and there's not a lot of intentionality to it. But there is like when I hear music, I get visuals. It's like I can it's like a dream starts to form, and so my lyrics and music are connected to visuals. So it's interesting that you pick that up on.
that's very, and you know what's interesting to me about that is I had no idea about that. But one of my other favorite artists who has a very theatrical, it's like more heavy metal stuff, but has a very theatrical aspect to it, has also mentioned that he has that. And when he'd be talking to his band before he'd really looked into it much, he'd be like, "It's the green part. What are you guys
Yeah,
doing?" Instead of,
I can totally understand that. I mean, I try to be a little more clear in communicating to my
yeah,
band, and but I always think of Brian Wilson in um, the bootleg tapes of the Smile recordings, where you hear them talking about the recording in the sound booth, and he's saying to the percussionist Hal Blaine of the Wrecking Crew. He's saying no, more like jewelry, more like jewelry. And Hal
right.
Blaine is thinking, what the fuck is this guy talking about? But I can totally understand that. And
Right,
sometimes I will give directions like that to my musicians. So, yeah.
right. And then in that case, if you do give them something that's open like that, how do they respond usually? Like, is it do they nail it, or is it a little bit of you have to work
I
with them?
I have been very lucky, and with my current band, very lucky to have people who are very responsive. And it's like casting a movie. I work with people who I know will instinctively and automatically get what I need.
Right,
I couldn't really work with just a session musician who just plays the notes. It is a collaborative effort, and they have to feel it, and they have to bring something of their own to it. So to do this, I have to actually have a rapport with musicians I work with, because also again, it's like a magical ceremony. You can't do a ritual with people who are not in the same wavelength. And the issues
no,
I've had with musicians that I've worked in the past are, by doing the music, we find out we're going in a different direction. So
right,
sometimes you are going in the same direction, and then you realize you're diverting from that path. So
right. And your music is more like when we had spoken a little few minutes ago about session musicians. They're very like, this is what I want, this is what you get. Where your music is a little bit more organic sounding. It seems that having musicians that would organically get what you're talking about and have their own natural spin on it would be
well,
more than
yeah, to me, it only works when they bring something exciting and vibrant of their own into the vision I bring to them.
right. And that's the
So,
beautiful thing about music. It's so collaborative, and it's above everything. Like you say, it's just
right, it's
brings
transcendent.
everything together.
Yeah, now that the pandemic seems to be normalizing,
Yeah.
I intend to focus almost entirely on music again. I've been working on a lot of books that are nearly done, or had been delayed by
Hmm.
the strict lockdown that we had here in Germany. But now I intend to totally focus on music from this
That's
point on.
perfect. It's and from being on stage myself, I can empathize with not having been able to do it for so long.
Right.
It really is that thing that kind of centers you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so kind of going back a little bit, your parents being musical and
Mm-hmm.
seeing you evolve through the years, what were their response to things like Radio Werewolf
Oh,
and
they weren't surprised. They had to deal with this. I mean, I was the kind of kid who. Oh, we've lost the mic again. Hold
what? Oh
on.
no, it's working.
Okay.
I can still hear you.
I was the kind of kid who would leave a rubber hand in the refrigerator, and blood and ketchup leading to my bedroom so that my mother would find it. So yeah, Radio Werewolf was just. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good, because it's a bit clippy here. Anyway,
Oh,
so
is it
yeah,
okay?
Radio Werewolf was just my everyday life since I came into this world. So no,
Right.
they weren't surprised at all. Yeah, they were used to it. I mean,
Did they?
they were occasionally worried about my safety because during the
Sure.
Radio Werewolf concerts, because they did turn into, like, you had a very tense atmosphere during the original Radio Werewolf concerts in Los Angeles and later in Germany. So,
Yeah.
but were they were totally supportive. Uh, that I think that's another thing about my music too, is that I think most rock musicians, if that's what I am, I don't really know, but
Mhm.
they are rebellious, and they're like making a statement of rebellion and going against the establishment and that kind of thing. And because my parents were bohemians and beatnik types, they were not, I didn't have anyone to rebel against, so I don't
Right.
really see music as like a way to say fuck you to society.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
so
You
it's
rebelling, you would have been like a lawyer or something.
exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that I think that's like, and that's why even when I was a Satanist or was a devil worshiper, to make it clear, someone who believed in the devil, not an atheist Satanist, uh,
Right.
I don't see it as necessarily being a rebellious adolescent, anarchic thing. I see it as a form of order, and
Right.
and this has made me very alienated from my peers in the rock world that are usually like eternally teenagers thumbing their nose at society, which
Yeah.
I don't really feel connected to that whole impulse.
Right. And them thumbing their nose at society and trying to be on their own is just like they're all doing the exact same thing. So
Oh well, right.
it's
I mean, I
what's
could
to
go
do
on.
with.
I could rant and rave about the hypocrisy of conformists
Yeah.
being nonconformist, but doing it in the very proper conformist way. Yeah. So
Could get stuck in that. Okay, so you had mentioned your dad showed you some stuff on guitar. I'm curious about your formal music training. Did you have a piano teacher?
I went to a piano teacher, but I was not a good student, and I
Mm,
learned the basics, and but I did not have the discipline to. I if Well, actually, maybe I should put it like this. I wanted to go into musical theater and classical music. I would not have gone into rock music or whatever you want to call whatever genre I
yeah.
do. I don't know. That's what people stick it into. I don't know if that is what it actually is.
Well, I
What
don't think they
happened
can
was,
put it anywhere. There's so many
yeah,
different genres
I
in there.
never know how to answer the question, what is my music? I don't know.
Yeah.
But so I was really a snob about rock music as a teenager. And when I was coming of age as a teenager, rock music had become very stale and stagnant. It was like what was popular then: Peter Frampton, the Eagles,
Right.
Boston, Foreigner, Three Dog Night. So it was not at its creative peak.
Right.
And what happened was that um, I went when punk rock started,
Hmm.
sort of by accident. I ended up having to go. I ended up going to many of the earliest punk rock concerts that happened in Los Angeles, and that for like about 4 years became like my university of music. I must have seen every major new wave and punk act that came to Los Angeles, and that's a long story of why that happened. But the turning point was, so I would have gone into something like classical or musical theater
Right.
or some combination of that. What happened in April of 77, I went to an Iggy Pop concert. It was Iggy Pop's comeback tour with Bowie playing keyboards, and an unknown band called Blondie opened for them. And and that was at the Santa Monica Civic in 1977. And
Wow.
that concert, because of Iggy Pop's performance, but also Debbie Harry's performance, um, made me think, actually, this is the better theater. This communicates better to an audience and is more somehow authentic and real. And that's when my snobism about rock music changed somewhat. But I still was affected by the French playwright and theorist Antonin Artaud and his idea of the theater of cruelty. And what I basically tried to do was adapt that to the rock music format. But I always had a feeling I was infiltrating rock music, not of it and not a
Right.
part of it, but like sneaking into it to reach that audience and bring them something different that they would not be exposed to.
Right. And it's interesting too, like talking about different genres. It was Radio Werewolf. I'd heard surf music, I heard punk music, you hear organs, you hear everything through it, but it's still a lot different than the newer stuff you're doing now. And being that you're throwing so much at it, it's really admirable that you can keep it fresh because of the amount of stuff you're doing in it. Now, do you find that that's a conscious thing for you, having to put a lot of different stuff together like that, or it's just the way that you write?
A lot of it is not conscious at all. I
Right.
really am like an open vessel to whatever comes into it, and I deliver it. I don't put a lot of conscious or deliberate thought into it.
Okay.
I
And
mean, but
as
the difference, Radio Werewolf was very much a high concept.
Mhm.
I mean, it was planned and conceived to have a particular theme and to be presented a certain way. So there were themes that I stuck to in that I like I couldn't do some songs that came to me because at that time because they were not Radio Werewolf songs. You
Right.
know, so Radio Werewolf was a distinctive ritual that lasted 9 years, but it had a particular goal, and it had about four different phases to it. But
Okay.
it was, it had certain limits in that it was presenting one particular image and one particular ritual purpose, which then, when the ritual was over, we ended it. But what I'm doing now, I don't, I'm not limited by any constraint. I don't have any particular theme. So whatever arises is what I will follow.
Awesome. Um, so you with the I've got off of your website a quote saying appearances of Radio Werewolf on the pioneering combat TV show Wally George's Hot Seat and the banning of the Friends of Justice Spring Equinox benefit concert for Manson pushed the Radio Werewolf cult into a far more controversial extreme, which made the rallies ever more tense and emotional spectacles. Can you elaborate on that? What sort of stuff was happening at those rallies? Like, what was the intensity?
Oh, there were death threats before almost every concert, which we would get in the dressing room, and we would laugh them off. I mean, it was the feeling was like going into battle.
Right.
After the Friends of Justice thing, which I'm not going to get into in this
Right.
interview, we will do another interview in which we can get into that. But
Yeah.
but briefly, that was a benefit concert in Los Angeles in 1987 to gather money for a lawyer to get Charles Manson a new lawyer and a new trial. That
Right.
was such an immensely controversial reaction to that from the Los Angeles music industry that was only like 18 years before. They knew him. They knew Terry Melcher. They knew the Beach Boys. It was
Right.
fresh in their mind. Like the people at the Whiskey and Roxy where I was performing, they had known
Hmm.
Manson. And I'll tell that story the next time we talk. I don't want to
Uh,
get distracted, but
yeah.
so that was a turning point. That was extremely controversial to the music industry itself. A lot
Right.
of people in the public supported it, and it was the first positive sort of objective thing about Manson. But it definitely changed everything. So the atmosphere of the concerts became fanatically pro and fanatically anti. So it had they really were rallies. I mean,
Yeah. Wow.
there
That's
was yeah.
sorry.
I mean,
That's two
there
very
was a
con. Sorry.
yeah, there was a lot of and so the music performed in that context was very powerful because it was confrontative, but also we had a fanatical following that was really cult-like, and
Right.
and we also had a fanatical hate group that hated us. So
Right.
Yeah.
So put those two
So
people in a room together and see what
right,
happens.
right. I mean, it was mostly positive, but there was a lot of tension. And then a problem with it was I think people came for the unique atmosphere of tension and conflict that happened,
Right.
and that almost overwhelmed the music at a certain point. And then concerts started getting banned. That there were some places that wouldn't let us play. Um, yeah, and it got worse than that. Los Angeles Police Department harassed me a great deal. That's a whole story we can get into. That gets into more socio-political aspects. But the thing is, Radio Werewolf was a ritual, and it did create changes in the real world. It was not limited to the stage, and that
Right.
was the
Well,
point of it. But I mean, I sort of recklessly in my youth just let's see what will happen if I do this. And then it
right.
got very, very strong effects, which still linger to this day, even though that ritual is over.
Right. I'd imagine with stuff like that, the energy that you've put out, and the energy that's coming back with you would eventually just uh, consume the whole thing and stick around for as long as it has, because it was such an outlet of energy.
Right, and young people discover it, yesterday, and it still has a lot of power to them, and to them it's new. So even though it's not what I'm doing anymore, or what I would do, it's like I often compare it to the sorcerer's apprentice. The magician
Right.
calls something up, then how, or Frankenstein's monster. You've created it. Now, how do you stop it? But it can't be
Right.
stopped. It's like you've put that into the universe.
Yeah. And there it is. Yeah. So, um, it's interesting you mentioned being banned places. Are there any like specific places you were banned, and where was your music the most well received?
Oh, it was well received everywhere, and in fact, the more controversy there was, the way that the human mind works, the more our fan base loved it and supported it. So really, like you mentioned, Wally George being on that show, even though we were hated on the show, the more hated we were, the more our fan base loved it. So in a strange way, you get to a certain point, you can't be controversial enough. But it was not fun and games. There was a point where it got to really be like fighting a war.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so yeah. So I like certain people in the LA music press, like absolutely waged a campaign to destroy us.
That's
So
incredible. Nobody got the joke, hey? Nobody,
oh no,
nobody
no, a
figured it
lot a
out.
lot of people did, but
Right.
people who are committed to this kind of these were even before political correctness, they were already commissars of wokeness. So
Right.
that's nothing new. That's something I have dealt with for decades.
It's just changed names over the years.
Yeah, it was an infection that was already beginning, and now it's become an epidemic, so or pandemic.
Right. Yeah. As one of the clips that we have that we're going to be moving on to soon, um, speaks about that, speaks on that, how everything is kind of gone nuts. Everyone's believing everything. There's so much information around. But
Right.
before we get there, I want to keep going in sort of order. I'm going to jump back a bit to skull culture,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that the origin of that is very interesting. And if you could, there was an anecdote I found about it, and if you could expand on it a little bit, that would be great.
Right. Well, skull culture. I had a few bands before that as a teenager that were more. They were almost more like a concept than a band because they never really gelled.
Right.
But there were a few, and then skull culture was the first musical aggregation of any kind that we recorded and people knew about it and got some press coverage, and it became something of a cult locally in Los Angeles. So skull culture, I think the anecdote you're referring to, the day it formed, I was working with a musician who I had found, a keyboard player, and he was terrified by my music, and he just couldn't handle it. I mean, we tried to work together, and he was actually frightened by it.
Right.
And which reminds me of another anecdote that I'll get into. But he said, I know a guy who's as weird as you are. You should work with him. So he gave me his number, and this was a musician named Kirby. And so the day we met, we started recording immediately. We got along completely, had the same kind of eclectic musical taste, and we started recording immediately. But it was the day after John Lennon was shot, and also a day and a half after uh, Darby Crash, the singer of the punk rock band The Germs, killed himself. And so we saw that as very symbolically as the death of, you know, classic rock and of punk rock. And like we were very aware of we are doing, you know, we that's all over, and now we are doing something other than that. So
Right.
that was the beginning of that. And even the skull culture, it was like we were looking at it like this is the posthumous, this is post, like this before the word post rock came up. That's what we
Yeah.
were thinking of. Like, okay, that's all done. That chapter of musical history is over, and we are beginning a new one. So that, and then we didn't play live deliberately. We just released audio cassettes, and some of them are on YouTube, demo tapes of what we did.
Oh, I'll have to deep dive and
And
take a look.
now, and Kirby, the other musician in Skull Culture, eventually became the videographer for the Radio Werewolf concerts and filmed the shows. So he was like the court photographer, and he also photographed some of Charles Manson's Superstar, the part that we filmed out in Death Valley and Barker Ranch.
That's interesting. That's neat that you can meet a another musician that you can work with on different levels, and that you
Right.
can have around for that long, because it's not
Yeah,
easy, as you know.
he became a part of the Radio Werewolf support team in that way because again there was a strong theatrical cinematic level to it, so everything was filmed and recorded and photographed. But yeah,
Right on. So, all right. Well, I think now is a good time to move on to the clips portion, because we're getting into more of the newer music.
mm-hmm.
We can move on into Kingdom of Heaven. So,
Right.
if you want to briefly explain what Kingdom of Heaven is.
Right. Well, just to fill in the gaps there,
Hmm.
there had been a long period in which I did not record or perform from the after Radio Werewolf ended in 1993. The only thing I did in between that publicly, I still played music and composed it, but I didn't perform, was this Christopher Lee album that came out in 1997,
Right.
which was the first album that Christopher Lee did where he always wanted to be a singer, and so I gave him the opportunity, and that was the first time that Christopher Lee sang on a full album. And then there was so that I did sort of to get back to the classical roots and theatrical roots of what I was doing. It was like it was a way of cleaning the palate after Radio Werewolf and getting back to the beginning of what I came from. And in 2014, I did my first concert in a long time in Dresden at the Tower Transmissions Festival. And at that concert, I did cover versions with the great but late Australian drummer John Murphy. And I did cover versions of all of the female singers who most influenced me as a
Oh,
kind of ritual of reverence and worship to the feminine principle and to the goddess. So that was a ritual of like a tribute to the to female singers that influenced me. And then after that, I recorded the Kingdom of Heaven album with James Collard, who was the former bass player in Radio Werewolf. We got together and collaborated album. So I think the clip you're going to play is the Ballad of Lurleen Taylor, correct?
yep, that's
Okay.
absolutely it.
Right.
Yeah.
So this was, as I said, I could if the theme of the song dictates it, I could do any kind of music whatsoever. I mean, if I was going to write a song about Kingston, Jamaica, I guess I would have to do a reggae song.
That's the
So this,
next album.
right, yeah. So this is a gospel song,
Hmm.
and the theme of, I mean, I was singing as like one of these low rent video evangelical televangelist preachers, and it's a song about, well, you can see it, but it's basically, the point of it is, which not everyone got, it's supposed to be literally a broadcast from like a storefront church of one of these low rent evangelical preachers. So
Right. All right. So,
you
well,
can you can roll it, like they used to say on the Tonight Show. Roll the tape.
here we go.
I was filled with the word only angels have heard. Speaking in tongues, Zabadon, Zizu Zathrak, Zachariah, Alakazam, Zam Zalabim, Zodiac, Hezekiah. I cast out 7 demons from Brother Owen's pickup truck. I tell you, that old Asmodeus, he was running out of luck. I healed a mighty strange growth on Sister Esther's head. I nearly raised Elvis back from the dead.
I love the tongue in cheek. It's just so funny. I was sitting back there just smiling the whole time. And the fact that anybody can get upset about something like that just blows me away. So you put a lot of detail into it. I mean, you have the number at the bottom for
Right,
sending.
right. For sending love donations. Yeah, it's meant to be like a testimonial of a particular kind of, actually, of Californian evangelical preachers that had TV shows. People like Dr. Gene Scott and that kind of thing that I used to watch for entertainment, or Trinity Broadcasting, or the 700 Club,
Right.
or all of these media, Christian media that attacked me during the Satanic Panic. So yeah,
Right. So
so
you get to
it's
thumb
sort
your
of
nose
sort
at
of
them a little bit.
not I mean, in a way, to do it properly, you have to become it.
Okay.
I mean, I think it is a good gospel song. It's not, I mean, I do actually like gospel music aesthetically, so I wanted to
Sure.
do a gospel music because I do like the spiritual power of it. At least it's got something metaphysical to it, and I wanted to try to do a gospel song. And it is a straight gospel song, you know.
Right. And it's another thing, just saying you get to do whatever you want. It's
Right,
awesome. You want to do a gospel song, you can do a gospel song. Um,
exactly.
so I'll move on to the next clip. Can you talk a little bit about when you put out the EP, the Futura model? Because that's actually the first song of yours I ever heard.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the Futura model, we first performed with my band at the Wave Gothic Treffen, which is the biggest Gothic festival in Europe, possibly the world, that
Hmm.
happens in Leipzig in the summer. And we did a performance there, and that we premiered it, and it went over very well. So the local Berlin label, the Epicurean, run by Stephen Hanser, wanted to put out an EP or something after the success of that concert. So that was the one we decided to put out. And the unique thing about the Futura Model EP, which came out on vinyl in a special edition, is it has 3 different versions of the same song.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, and so this one is the one that ended up on my 2019 album, The Illusionist, but it
Hmm.
has 3 different takes, which are quite different than each other, and that comes out of the fact that, like you say, I have almost this maniacal resistance to repeating myself. Even
Hmm.
when I perform my own songs, I usually change them. By the time I perform them, they're almost like cover versions of my own music, because, like, I'll keep the structure, but
Hmm.
I'll change the style or the way that the song is done or the pace, or so that was like an experiment to show that you can look at a song like from different facets and different sides. So that Futura model EP that came out in 2017 was an exercise in showing, like, here's the basic song, but here are different variations on the theme. But
That's
this version that we will see is the official version that is also on the Illusionist album from 2019.
right. And here it is.
Oh, Houston, I have a problem. I don't think she's from around here. She left her digits in my little blue book, but the luminous letters aren't clear.
Now, we're just taking little snippets of these songs, and I suggest everybody go and listen to the full things, because like I said earlier on, it's definitely a trip you're going on.
And those are all seeable on my YouTube channel, the Nikolas Schreck channel. So all of them are there, and also all the albums are now available on Bandcamp as well.
Perfect. And we'll put links to all of those things on the video when it's out. Now with this one, I noticed that Zena's name was on it as well. So was she a collaborator on this album?
No, she took the photograph.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
We have not musically collaborated since the end of Radio Werewolf in 1993, but she took that photograph that the videographer then adapted into that animated head or planet.
Oh, okay. Oh, perfect. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and it was, so this being the first thing that I heard of you, I was like, oh, it's kind of dance music, but I think those are real drums, yeah?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
That's Heathen Ray. He's a real drummer.
right.
He plays real drums.
And it's very dancey, and it has an electronic feel, but also, like you say, there's other stuff on top of it where it goes back to the two types of music at once kind of slamming together.
Right.
It's
I
just
think that's a perfect example of what I mean of pop music and avant-garde. I mean, there is this, because people come up with pigeonholing genre phrases, like there's the phrase avant pop, and I think that could fit into that.
sure.
Because so much avant-garde classical music has really, I mean, like that's probably the main influence on a deep level.
Mhm.
I think it seeps into almost everything I do. But yeah, that's a good example of that. And
I
as
think
far
so
as
too.
early influences that you mentioned before, I can think of two musical entities that influence that, like Per Ubu, like I mentioned, very
Hmm.
often have like a pop melody, but then there's all kinds of dissonance creeping into it. It's almost like there's a tension between the structure of pop and then the more abstract, transcendent avant-garde music. And then another band that did that, especially when Brian Eno was a part of it, was Roxy Music. That was a big influence on me in my youth. You had Brian Ferry writing parodies of pop songs of different eras, and then Brian Eno sneaking in electronics and dissonance and synthesizers, which were then unheard of, now have become common. So
Right.
I think there's a certain influence of that in that particular song. Another
That makes
interesting thing about the Futura model, a girlfriend of mine gave me the idea for it. She was interested in the idea of sex with aliens or sex with extraterrestrials, which
right.
is what basically the song's about. But then the song is also like a very desolate, uh, you know, heartbreak song. And then our
Right.
relationship ended really horribly. So a lot of people that I know pointed out that the song almost prophesied the reality, even though it's set in outer space. This is an odd thing about music, is that
Right.
very often you write a song and you don't know where the hell it came from or what it means, but you find out later. And
That's
and
very true. I was just thinking that the other day that any song I've ever written, any lyrics I've ever written down, I kind of come to what it's about way later.
well, this is how magic works, and music and magic are connected. But I can think of many examples where I wrote some lyrics and didn't really know what they meant, but they had some meaning emotionally, and then you
Right.
find out later. And then another song that we don't have a clip of yet, but "Gone to Persia"
Mm-hmm.
is on the Illusionist album,
Mm-hmm.
and that too sort of had an odd prophetic thing in that it's a song about a plane that is going to Persia,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a quote from a film, Gone to Persia. But the theme of the song, it's like a metaphor for a psychedelic trip, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also literally about a plane going to Persia and being shot down. And right about the time that it actually came out, that song, and was first played on the radio, there was this incident that happened where a plane was mysteriously shot down as it landed in Tehran, in Iran. So
Right.
a lot of the lyrics of that could fit that incident. And
Right.
I find very often songs come to you and then you find out what they could be about later. I mean, of course, it's not that black and white. You can absolutely say this means that, but those are
Right.
two songs that seem to be prophecies.
Right. And music can never really be black and white. It's such a mystery in and of itself, and
Well,
so magical, as you say.
that's why I think it's by far the most interesting art form because it's so indefinite and abstract and leaves itself open to interpretation.
And is also it's really interesting on how many senses can be cued by music and by sound in
Well,
general.
I think that one problem today is people listen to too much music. I think the internet has made it that, and like people who walk around with earbuds on wherever they go, I think it desensitizes people from that sensory effect that you're talking about. So I think it's important to leave silence in
Right.
between if you are really a connoisseur of music and not just leaving it on as background music like you said
Mhm.
before. It's like if you were a gourmet, you don't just gorge yourself on McDonald's. You have to clear the palate and to really taste something. So
Right.
I think the the overabundance of entertainment and music dulls the senses or desensitizes people to the power of it.
I agree. And there's a lot of information coming with all that as well that nobody knows where to put. So it really is just trying to, it's a new thing trying to sieve through everything coming at you to keep
Oh,
organic and
well,
keep finding the,
clearly the human race is not up to the task of absorbing all the information or deciding what information is junk and what is valuable. But
absolutely. And I think that's funny because that gets us into our next clip we've got. Um, oh, actually, sorry, no, I jumped the gun.
okay.
The next clip we have is of this hideous thing,
Mm-hmm.
which again touches on to your long life connected to Charles Manson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, this is far later on. What made you decide that you wanted to like go back into that so in depth musically?
I
Because it is
wanted
really
yeah, I wanted to I believe actually it's really my final statement on the whole thing because even the book, even the 9,000 page book I've written, uh, that's still on a rational level of facts or disputing facts or saying this happened on that date, but that doesn't capture the mystery and strangeness of the whole phenomenon. And I
right,
wanted I so I mean there's something uncanny about that whole phenomenon that is above and beyond, on this day somebody did that and then this happened. There's something
Right.
about it that is of a spiritual nature, and that's what I wanted to capture. And the melody that I keep using, like a leitmotif that keeps returning in the song, came to me as the musical definition of the emotion that whole lifelong involvement with that phenomenon has given me. So to me, this communicates what the whole thing is about more than any logical or rational explanation I could give of it. So I felt the need almost like to exercise myself of it. I had to condense it all into music, which is the main way I really communicate on the deepest level.
Right. And there are a lot of, I mean, information wise, there's a lot of information you put in here for, through visuals that have to do with the case that people who don't necessarily know a lot about it might miss.
Well,
But
I deliberately made it so and a lot of people have heard the song live or heard it on the record and enjoyed it on its own merits without really having any idea what it's about, because I don't spell it out with names or specific things. If you know the case in depth, then you will get it. But it's meant to have a life of its own, that a listener could enjoy it and interpret it according to their own subjective perspective, and not necessarily just like a police procedural. So that was
right.
deliberately left abstract. I mean, for instance, how many people have any idea that Yul Brynner had anything to do with that case? But I deliberately chose to perform it in the video as Yul Brynner, as his performance as Ramesses the Pharaoh in the Ten Commandments. And
Right.
everything in the video, if you know the case, you'll get it right away. You'll know what the lyrics mean. If you don't, you probably won't. And that's more and more what I'm trying to do, is communicate on different levels.
Right. All right. Well, let's take a look at it and we'll see what we're talking about.
She liked her coffee black.
Oh, sorry.
Now we're not coming back. Lost in a cul-de-sac. 8 days afloat in an ocean unknown. We drifted too far to ever get home. We ran into some pirates on the high seas. We were too high to see what the sea brings. Too high to see what the sea brings. Too high to see what the sea brings to shore. A hideous thing.
That one clip alone, being that, obviously looking into the case a little bit, has so many things, so many talking points, like the clock and the words you use.
Right.
It's very interesting, and it's interesting too that you mentioned that it's you kind of trying to shed it, trying to get it out, exercise it,
Yeah.
because it is so much. It is a very involved song, even without knowing about all the case and
Right.
everything.
Right. And it is also, like you said, a rock opera. It has three very distinct phases to it. It's a long song, so
Mhm.
it's like it is actually like a suite,
I
it's
was going
not
to say it has the sections. You section it out like
right.
a song like that. It has the B section with the man on the piano, and
Exactly.
yeah, it's wonderful. I'm a
Thank
big
you.
fan of that song.
Thank you.
Um, mhm. So
I,
then,
I also wanted to point out that was the drummer, that's Heathen Ray, the real drummer you mentioned, also from the Futura model.
oh
and
right,
and then the woman portraying both the victims and the commune girls is
Mhm.
Luana Russetti, a collaborator of mine, who's a great dancer, and we will be working together on another project soon.
Oh great. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
So another thing that I noticed when I first started looking into your music was the cover of I'm Afraid of Americans that you did. And I wasn't going to play the clip of this, but because people know the song and they can go and look it up. But I just remember, because being a kid when that song, the collaboration between Bowie and Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails came out, that was a big deal song for me. And so when I saw that you had done it, I was very interested, and I listened to it, and I think you put a really interesting spin on it and made people, uncomfortable, which is
very, very.
yeah, which is perfect for that the sentiment of that song.
Well, I think it also, it sums up, it is a very visceral reaction to how I feel about, I've hardly ever done anything about current events.
Right.
That was an EP that came out last year, and that was in the context of an alternative universe political campaign for president. That I was like in the concept of it, it was me versus Kanye West for president.
Right.
Of course, yeah. Of course, I won. Yeah. Of course, I won, even though he tried to steal the election. I won.
Yeah.
Kanye. But so that's really the only thing I've ever done. That particular kind of like this hideous thing being an exorcism of that whole subject. I found myself during that period being so many people talking to me about their various commitment to so-called left-wing or right-wing ideology. So that I'm afraid the EP is called "I'm Afraid of America, Schreck 2020," like a political campaign.
Right.
And it on the cover of the album is a photograph of me from 1984 at a Ronald Reagan rally, which covers, it just says everything, that particular photograph. And there's a lot behind what was happening in that photograph. So I guess the next song you were going to play is from that EP.
Yeah.
These are two songs that really have to go together, but I guess you're going to play clips from each. Is that correct?
I can. Yeah, I was just going to play the one from They to keep us in time, but I can. It doesn't really matter if they're.
Yeah, I think it's important to play a little of both, because the thing is, it's like I don't want, actually when I write a song or a book, it's usually because I'm done with talking about the subject and I want to eternally put it out there and close the door on it. And so this is my ultimate statement on this whole ideological political madness that is, and conspiratorial madness that is the hallmark of our particular idiot era that we are in right now. But it's interesting because I've never even addressed current events whatsoever. And it's not a political statement. It is a visceral statement of repulsion and disgust against both political partisan extremes of left and right and their complete falsity. I can't. So rather than say it, I think these songs communicate it.
Absolutely. Let's check it out. Here we go. Sorry. Here you go.
They're plotting and they're scheming, they conspire while I'm dreaming. So I wrapped in foil tightly round my head. If they can fake school shootings and hide the fact that Elvis isn't dead, surely they can find me in my bed. It's like the plot of The Matrix. They're making clones of Taylor Swift. Skull and bones, they still persist. They're crushing all who dare resist. Roswell, Oswald, Waco, Jacko, Bilderberger, Crisis Actor, all of them will be together. MK Ultra Malefactor. Roswell, Oswald, Waco, Jacko, Bilderberger, Crisis Actor, all of them will be together. manufacture. Ultra malefactor. Bilderberger crisis actor.
It's so, the way that you wrote that song, I don't know if it's how you meant it to go, but like you were saying about all the stuff flying at you, that part of the song where it's just rapid fire, everything.
Well, I wanted to recreate the bombardment of propaganda and false information that is constantly radiating from the media, and wanted to put that into musical terms.
Right. And
so
just
that it's almost overwhelming to the senses. You can't quite catch what's being said or what's being seen. And I think that's
right.
the world we're living in, with this 24/7 bombardment of propaganda from all sides.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, was it was very poignant about that. And then the other thing that I just think is so funny is that, what did you think when you saw that picture of Taylor Swift and Xena?
Oh, well,
around?
you have no idea the kind of ridiculous conspiracy theories we've seen. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. But I mean, when you see, when you are the subject of these things, and we've had absurd conspiracy theories said about us. I mean, basically the satanic panic that we endured in the 80s,
right,
QAnon and all that, is just, satanic panic 2.0. We've seen all this.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, nothing shocks me anymore.
No.
I've heard, I've seen the most ridiculous things about me and about her, and anybody in that field has, but we get an extraordinary amount of it. It's astonishing. But when people think I'm very harsh about conspiracy theories, quote, and yes, I am, because I know what it's like to be at the center of them and to be accused of absolute nonsense that you have nothing to do with and don't even care about or know about.
Right.
For these people that are totally immersed in it, it's entertainment to them. It's not real. But I've seen it from the other side. So that informed a lot of the contempt that I express in that particular song.
Right. And it makes sense, being that, like you say, on the one side of it, and then seeing you, that gives you a perspective on media that a lot of people don't have, because they haven't been in the line of fire.
When you've been behind the scenes and you see how the media operates, you can't ever go back to taking it seriously again. You understand the manipulative power. And I know when I say that, each side will think I'm talking about the enemy, but no, I'm talking about both.
Everybody.
Sides.
Yeah.
Everybody, without exception.
Right. They just get into pack mentality at a certain point, and it's just top and top.
Exactly. It's become very tribal in the worst way.
Right. And so now we've gotten to the point where we're going to check the other side of they out, which is the nice people.
Right.
And so it's funny that you called it they, because that's the age-old question with people who just start throwing out random facts. And it's like, who are they? Who are these they people that you're speaking of?
Right.
And so it's interesting that you put they and the nice people together in one song, because the nice people are probably they. If you think about it.
No, the they that the people in the they song are thinking about are the nice people, for sure.
Right. Okay, great. So I will put on this other clip. The picture on it is fantastic. Ready?
The nice people. They're having a seizure. The nice people. Don't know how to have fun. The nice people. Toughen up, soldier. The nice people. The world's getting colder. The nice people. They'll kill you with kindness. The nice people. Pray they never find us. The nice people. Sign every petition. The nice people. Have such good intentions.
That's what my anger justifies everything.
Yeah,
Oh, that's perfect.
coming up with the slogans was half the battle with that one.
Right. When you're making a song like this, are you involved like one on one with the person making the video? Like, are you there being like, this is what we're putting in, this is what's
Yes,
happening?
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, Parker T-Balt, who made that video for his company Focus Shift
Hmm.
Media, um, in a strange way, he's almost become part of the band because, too, like I'll say, here's the basic idea. I know you will get what I mean. And give him a lot of leeway, and he has a very visionary understanding of exactly what imagery. So I'll give him a format, and then, I mean, it's kind of like a director saying to an actor, this is what I want, and then the actor brings something to it. So yeah, he brought a lot of his own vision, but it's like there's a rough script, but
Yeah,
then I try to give him the opportunity to bring his vision to it, which he did, and he did a magnificent job on that one.
absolutely. And so he the person that you work with on most of your videos, or do you?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's your video guy.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, so before we go into the new video, which is we're going to play in its entirety. It's 9 minutes and 27 seconds, and it is this is my favorite video of yours, absolutely, because it is, as far as your music goes, it's very straightforward in what your message is with the video and what's happening when because though I've spoken to you about the sort of things that you're speaking on in the video. Can you explain a little bit what people are going to see, what it's about, and what you wanted to put across?
I would say with this particular song, why is it powerful? Is because I have no idea what it's about. It really
Right,
it came to me, and it's totally spontaneous. And that's why, I mean, it is truly psychedelic. It's
right,
and I mean, I could look at it and give some sort of rational explanation from my point of view, but I don't know where it came from
right.
or what it means, literally. Sometimes I have a vague idea, but this came literally out of left field and possessed us and was spontaneous.
It's awesome.
So,
I get a real vibe off of it of transcendence, and because we've spoken before about transcending this reality into the next thing, that's what I get a strong feeling of, as well as psychedelics, because it is a very very psychedelic video.
right. But I mean, I could, I mean, when I listen to it, I can see, okay, here's this theme that I suppose is there, but I certainly didn't intentionally put it
Right.
in. It just came to me. It's one of these songs that created itself.
Perfect.
And I think that's always stronger than when you bring in some human intentionality. I mean,
Right.
it's a fine line between the discipline and the craft of
Hmm.
delivering, not letting it drift into total chaos. But I think this finds the balance there.
Absolutely. Well, with that,
So I would say it is genuine surrealism. It's a dream, and you can make of it whatever you want.
all right. Well, thank you very much for letting us show it on here. I'm very very excited. So, without further ado, here we go. Retrograde is Mercury.
Your present waits beneath the tree, radiating mystery. A presence in the suit of mail haunts the royal armory. The green door down the corridor opens with a secret key. Behold the Duke of Burgundy, resplendent in his heraldry. Arrayed in garb of alchemy, a master of astronomy. As he charts the distant stars, retrograde Mercury. As he charts the distant stars, retrograde is Mercury. His mistress waits in agony, performing perverse pageantry. Beneath the veiled tapestry, she asks the gods for prophecy. Receives an awful augury, foresees the act of savagery. A vision of the scarlet sea, whose ruby waves crush endlessly upon the strand of Brittany. Circe's stealthy sorcery, serpentine encircles me, incarnating the artery. Hark the dead-set timpani, a discordant symphony, a stirring in the cemetery, cadavers in cacophony, a melody of a melody, when trumpets blare the fanfare for the emperor of misery. The envoy masters archery, her arrow flies with certainty. The messenger from all who flee, O banshee of Basilides, the ravage is guaranteed. The creature in the nursery sharpens its knives for surgery. Dungeons of debauchery in castles of old Germany. The spear that's in the treasury is just a skilled facsimile. The holy grail's a forgery. The mob hauls out for anarchy. The torment of lycanthropy lights the Baroness of Saxony. The serious in luxury, she stalks the courts of Italy, seducing noble progeny, robs them of their purity, delighting in depravity, she violates virginity. On relics of antiquity, ran beasts for her menagerie, and astrologiology, retrograde is Mercury. Retrograde is Mercury. Rumors taint the victory, a bishop in his finery. The holy see in harlotry, the glory of the Trinity has given way to sodomy. Retrograde is Mercury. Retrograde is Mercury.
Wow. Thank you so much for letting us show that.
My pleasure. Thank you for revealing it to the world.
He did an amazing job. There's so much in that. I'm really a big fan.
Thank you. I also want to acknowledge the incredible keyboard playing of
Right.
Adam Mata Mahabik, the drumming, battery, and percussion by Heathen Ray. As you were going to mention, it actually has a guitar in it. And
Yep.
that is from Jerome Alexander, who also plays the bass on that song.
Mhm.
And the production of Roger Huneke at Music Baccarai, also he contributed as much as the musicians themselves. So
As a good producer and engineer should. That's awesome. So with us having seen something new of yours and having heard it and its recording up against a few other things that you've done, one thing I wanted to talk to you about. Now, this is going to get into something close to my heart, which is just nerding out about the process of making music.
Well, actually, that's a big. I mean, that's something that is paid too little attention. I mean,
I think so as well. I always am gravitated towards something that shows how to put it together, because it helps aspiring musicians as well who don't really know, they don't have an idea how to grasp these things that are flying at them from elsewhere. And so I think talking about it and putting it on a more level field is good. So with that, you mentioned who was the production engineer and the musicians involved. So when you're writing, how much of the writing of the music is done in studio and how much of it is done at home or outside practices?
It depends on the song. There are some songs that I work out on my keyboard completely and then bring to the musicians and have them add to it.
Right?
The vocal line I usually have for the particular lyrics already set, and it usually doesn't change very much. Although once you start rehearsing it, there can be slight variations. This particular song was created almost entirely improvisatory. And
Oh,
then
wow.
it was like a jam session that turned into the song, there was very little that was changed about it. It
That's
came out
interesting.
perfectly realized. It was an astonishing experience to. I think if it has a lot of power, it's because it was impressive to us as it came out of nowhere. So
Right.
this particular song had its own life, but there is no. I don't really have a formula or format. Sometimes I have a very specific, clear idea. This is the intro. This is the verse. This is the chorus, and then sometimes it takes a life of its own.
Right.
That so I don't have a particular procedure. Like I said, many times a snippet of lyrics and melody will come to me, and I don't try to force it. It could sit there for a few weeks, and then the next part will come. It's like picking up a radio transmission, and then you have the feeling, okay, yes, I guess I got all of it. Now let's
Right.
try to put it together like a puzzle. But it's the process varies as much as the themes and the style of the music. There is not one particular way that I go about it.
Right. And so every album would take a different amount of time to write and put together. The thing that's interesting to me about this album in particular is the production is way different. The sound is totally different than all the other ones in that it's a lot cooler. If you know what I mean, it sounds a little more compressed, and I don't know if that's just because the addition of the guitar, but the drums seem more upfront than they have in the past, and there's
Well,
more
yeah,
specificity to the instrumentation.
yes, it is very deliberate. The album before this that we didn't actually we couldn't make a video. We were going to make a video for the album before this album, which came out on the spring equinox of this year. Oh, a Weird Flower. The album before it, Berlin Noir, is
Hmm.
very dark and very somber and very. It was recorded in the midst of the pandemic, and even though the songs were mostly written before that, it captures a very autumnal, somber, melancholy mood. And I definitely wanted to do something that was a contrast to that. Although me not being dark just means going from light black to dark black. A little bit of gray. But in compare, so that this was very much more. There's definitely heavier drum.
Hmm.
This is yeah, it's heavier. Like in 1968 in English music, they would say it's heavy,
Yeah.
and I wanted. Because I look at albums as albums. It's like
Hmm.
a novelist writes about this, and then they write about that. And I think these three albums, The Illusionist, Berlin Noir, and Oh, a Weird Flower, should be experienced together in chronological. They are part of a piece, and I see them. I didn't think of it that way, but in retrospect, they almost form a trilogy, and this is
Yeah.
the end of a certain era of my music, and where I'm going to go next, I think will be quite different. Though, there are always similar themes and musical motifs that will return, but I think those three all fit together. So to answer your question, this was a heavier album, and maybe definitely focus more on dynamics, whereas the album before that is more abstract and like I said, melancholy. This one is more
Mm.
powerful, I would say.
Right. I think that's heavy was the perfect word for it.
Right,
It definitely has that more pressing, pounding feel to it. And I
right,
think that now hearing you say that it's the end of a trilogy, it makes a lot of sense that Retrograde as Mercury would be the last song because it's a very intense song and a very intense video.
Yeah, well,
which
I
which
do
would
think
wrap it up.
in an unconscious way, I do think it reflected the time in which we recorded it. I mean, retrograde was in Mercury when we recorded it, and
Right,
everything was fucking up, everything was breaking, everything was difficult.
right,
Not only in the world situation, but in our personal lives, and it was almost like a embracing of the chaos and the fucked up nature of samsara,
right.
because you couldn't escape it. So I do think it's like a time capsule of that particular time. Not that we're in any way out of the chaos yet, but
Right.
or may never be. Probably will never be. But so yeah, I think that that song being the last song, that is like the end of that movie. Those three albums fit together as a trilogy, and then where I'm going next, I definitely need to give it a breather
Yeah.
and let something different develop that will be appropriate. Also, as we start looking at to live performance, one thing that came to me in the pandemic is I really cannot return. Like in 2020, when the pandemic started, I was about to go on a tour, and it was, all planned. And then, of course, everything, one little thing after the other was canceled, canceled,
Right.
canceled. And then when you stop doing what you've done all your life, you I, you realize you're almost on automatic pilot. And I realize I do not want to and cannot go back to like the typical rock club performance. And whatever we do in the future, it may be more limited, it may be less often, but it will have to be at a setting or a venue that is as striking as the music. It has to suit what the music is. So I'm thinking about different formats and ways of performing the music that is not part of the whole music industry's way of doing things. This very routine, um, mundane way of presenting music.
Right. And that's very interesting that with this huge amount of time we've had off of living the way that we've been used to, a lot of people have had to look at the way that they're doing things, and if they want to continue in that vein. So, and with what it's put forth, this big disease that had us all freaked out for a long time, it makes you really think like, well, what is this actually doing for me? Am I doing this, like you say, am I doing this on autopilot, or
Mm-hmm.
am I still in love with this thing that I cherish so
Oh, well,
much?
I am very much in love with music, but
Right.
I never have been in love with the music industry or the
No.
cliches and formats or ways that music is presented. I've always bridled against it and pushed against it, but I know I have changed very much in this period in many ways, been introspective, changed things about myself because it was a wake-up call that allowed me to say, well, I can jettison this. I don't need to keep continuing in that path just because I was on it.
Right.
So, yeah. So I have. It's kind. I feel similar. It's kind of like Richard Wagner having to build Bayreuth to perform his operas properly.
Right.
I don't have a king as a patron, but I have to do something like that.
So now that we've gotten to the end of this, I think this is a good spot to start wrapping up. Could you tell us what you have in store for us in the future, and um, then we'll go about our
Hmm.
respective business.
Right. Well, I don't know. I don't. I mean, I feel like that phase of my music has concluded. I
Hmm.
can look at it as a trilogy. I will certainly be incorporating all of these songs into my performance repertoire and performing them live. And we're starting to rehearse to get ready to do concerts when we can find appropriate venues for them that would be suitable. But I don't really want to know where I'm going next. I need to I have to let it develop. And more, I feel like spontaneity is the key of what I want to do. I don't really want to have a plan, particularly after the restrictions and isolation of the lockdown that we had here and the pandemic. I wanted to be an open field and see what happens. So I can't tell you. It will not be unpredictable, and hopefully it will surprise me as much as you.
Perfect. And in the meantime, you have a couple books on the way. And the
So
Manson
I've
file
heard.
will be out.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been
Yep.
told
Well,
from time to
all
time.
the Manson file was delayed by the lockdown.
Hmm.
The Satanic Screen was supposed to be republished, a new English edition that has been
Okay.
postponed. I have several other books. A book about Abraxas will be coming out, and there are others on the pipeline. I prefer not to talk about until they're actually
Sure.
ready to go. But yeah, as far as literary work, that is what's coming next. But as far as musically, I definitely will be recording something before the end of the year. But I have some ideas in mind. But like I say, I want to keep it spontaneous and open, and not. I don't have a game plan for where I will go. I will react to the situation.
Right. And that's how we keep getting all this authentic music out of you. I think it's the way that it flows out of you. And I'm very thankful that we get to experience it. And I want to thank
Well,
you for coming and speaking with me. And I want to thank Danny After Dark and Mr. Beckham for helping me put all this stuff together. Um,
well, it was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and for your thoughtful questions. It's a refreshing change from the usual. So
Thank you so much.
well
That means a
well
lot.
done. Yeah, it was an actual conversation and not just a routine going through of the usual questions I'm asked. So I do appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much, sir. And I will talk to you sooner than later, and we will do this
Well,
again.
I think we have a loose understanding that we will speak about another subject at
Yeah,
the appropriate time.
yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you
Okay.
again, Nicholas. Thank
All
you,
right.
everyone, for coming.
Many blessings to you and to your listeners. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me.
All right. Take care.